So the comic shows.
I thought he was going to take you out for that thing before.
Keystone Cops, mate.
Did Daniel like to dig it?
I was going to come over and just pick you out.
By the neck.
All right, yeah, for some of you may have not seen the filming, clearly what Neville and I do is alluvial cut all the way down to the bedrock. And we usually do it 4 or 5 machine buckets wide, and that gives us enough room to move quite comfortably around each other all day long. But as you'll notice, as we start cutting down, you get the colour change where you come into the nice gold bearing material. We're just sort of coming into some red drift type material now. We're out on the edge a fair bit. You can see the old timers had a few stab holes out this far, but the main gutter ran down through there where we've dug. But there's nothing to say gold didn't sit out on this edge, because clearly we do quite often get bits that sit out on the edge. So I'll just cut 6 to 8 inches at a time. Once we start getting a few bits, then I usually cut a bit finer, just to give the detector a better chance if there's anything in between, smaller stuff. But that's pretty much the process. All of the overburden just goes off into dug dirt. You never put overburden on dirt you haven't dug, because you'll lose your edge where you're digging. So too many times if you spread that material out over dug dirt, you can't see where you have and haven't dug. So it's always on dug dirt. This is the edge. We're just digging back along this last little edge here, and that's pretty much Charlie's Gully for the boundary of the property, dug, finished.
So would you expect gold to be in that, what you've just dug out there, fine stuff?
No, generally not. Generally not. We find once we get down a bit closer to the bedrock. What's that there, Nev? Is that sort of bedrocky material there?
No, not yet.
Not yet?
No, not yet. No.
Just in front of you, back behind you there. No, back behind you.
Yeah. No, there's a little bit, but it's not. But it's just a bit of decomposed stuff that's come down off the reef.
Yeah, okay. Because what we find is once we get out on this edge, it just gets very shallow. So we'll find that edge, and generally where it's slid in is where you'll get your finer grade.
Yeah. What Mick and I do is we leave nothing to chance. We don't know where the best gold's going to be, so we dig everything. We start at the start, we formulate a plan. When we first started here, we dug a couple of costains across just to have a look at what the gutters were doing. So we got a good understanding of that, and then we started down at the bottom end of our boundary, of our lease, and then we've just dug everything up from there. But we don't know whether we're going to get gold here or not. It's sort of when you get closer to the bottom, you know, some people sort of, they see you swing and they go, oh gee, what might you be missing? What we do on our way down, because I may as well be doing something, so we detect everything on the way down. We get throw out gold that the old miners threw out, but then sometimes we get a bit of stuff that's held up high naturally. So whereas a lot of other people, as Mick would say, they just dig straight to bottom and the rest goes out in their waste, and potentially they've lost a hell of a lot of gold. And we'd probably say how much?
Over 30%.
Probably over 30% of
we get on the way down.
Of our gold would be on the way down, which would normally, by everybody else's standards, go out on the waste pile and then be just put back in the ground. So we give everybody misses gold when they're using machinery. There's no doubt you can't get every piece, and you just have to reside yourself to that fact. So we give ourselves the best chance to get it. Like the big fella, I probably heard that a bit over a metre deep, you know, from like
we're digging down.
It was another metre to down to where that was. So Mick had taken.
You even hit the white pipe clay, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, so you know, we sort of, like I said, and particularly this area, we want to do that because there was, particularly in the main lead, a lot of gold up high. And we don't want to run the risk of destroying those sort of nuggets. So once we get to the point where the signal's, you know, a really good identifiable signal, and particularly large, then Mick will shut down and he'll actually enjoy the moment with me down in the hole. So
That's a good place to hit them on top of that bucket.
it is, and then I don't have to do all the digging all by myself.
I don't know whether...
You want the big pick or the little one?
Right. Because I usually know I've got a bit of digging to do if he wants the big pick.
Yeah. But, you know, because it is monotonous work, it's just digging all day. I'm just walking up and down all day. They're good moments when you get bits of gold, but when there's something potentially pretty good,
well, you don't know what you're going to hit in the next stroke.
No, but I mean, that's a moment that you need to savour and enjoy together. Yes, there's been times where we've had nice bits of gold and Mick actually couldn't get down in the pit. So I just dig it out and toss it up to him, and he's still just as happy. But it's still, you know, for mates, it's a good experience and a good thing to share that moment together and share the digging, because otherwise I'd be worn out even more. So, but yeah, it's just gradually just dig, and we give ourselves every opportunity to get, you know, as much as we can. We sort of got a good understanding of what goes on here, and everywhere else. It doesn't matter. We move over to the next gully, we start the whole process all over again, and that's, you know, as soon as we get down to this type of material, we would take samples, we pan it, we see if it's carrying any fine gold, and we do that about every 2 or 3 feet. We take samples just to see what there is there. So we've got an understanding of what material we should be saving for the future.
So this is natural ground that you're working on?
There are old diggers' holes. You can see an old diggers' hole here.
Okay.
There's another bit of remnants of one here.
There was 4 diggers' holes in this pit.
So
from the top.
So Nev, when
You're saying that's an old digger's hole?
Yes.
Different colour?
Yeah, because of that mixture there,
Oh, yeah.
as opposed to this deeper, darker red.
So
Okay,
that's
so
the depth
that's actually being mixed up,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, and there's no consistency, in the colour. So what the old miners used tend to do was, because they would have a lot of dirt, someone that sunk a hole beside them, so when they're digging their hole, they tip their dirt back down into that hole. So, and that's why you would generally get gold, you know, in probably the first 4 or 5 feet of the old digger's hole that they might have thrown out, because as they got closer to bottom, that's coming out and going in the top of the hole. So,
This is where you find your old picks and rubbish and stuff like that.
generally
Relics?
closer to the bottom. Yeah.
Do you collect the relics, or what do you do, Mick?
Oh, we're not
Do you
near
collect the
bottom.
relics?
Yeah, sometimes we find holes that have been used just with old bottles.
Oh,
And
awesome.
they're just incredible.
Yeah.
I just try not to break too many.
Yeah.
Can't help it, can you, with that?
Yeah.
It's not a toothpick.
Yeah, and that,
Because that's a general purpose bucket for natural ground. Yeah. It's got a cut. If you had a flat blade, we'd be here all day just digging one hole.
we know people. Yeah, no, we know people that do that. It's more strain and stress on your hydraulic system
It won't cut it.
to do it,
It won't cut the
and you just waste that much more time and diesel, and it's just not
It's not efficient at all.
But that's an interesting thing too, as Mick was just pointing out. The old timers, when they were digging somewhere, they would pick one hole, which would generally be their rubbish hole.
Yeah.
And when that filled so far, then they pick a new one. So it's not like you get bottles and that in every hole. It's usually one hole.
Yeah.
So then as soon as you identify that, you try to excavate that out as very carefully as you can, so that you can try to salvage that history. You know, and that's what we do. And generally we like to donate those things to, you know, museums, local museums, and that sort of thing. So, yeah. But most of them turn around and say, "Oh, we got enough bottles." You know? and things like that.
In the early days, with the hunters used to go out with a steel spike and
that's right. Yeah,
hit the glass.
Yeah, and they still do. They still do that today. We find that just as exciting as finding a bit of gold. Because we could spend. We did down there further. We spent probably half a day excavating one dump hole. You know, but just doing it carefully and having a bit open there, and then just gradually picking a little bit out with the pick and exposing different bits and pieces and artifacts.
Are most of the bottles still intact?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
They've never been crushed by earth pressure.
No. Yeah. So and we do believe, on the main lead particularly, we might find some extraordinary things.
Maybe we should have Christmas here.
Given the history of
Have
the
a proper
league,
bloody Christmas.
so you got to
Bring the
imagine,
plum pudding.
like 35,000 diggers, from just above the old lead res, down to the school, So predominantly on this particular property at any one point in time there was 15 to 20,000 diggers, and that's a lot of people. So
A lot of rubbish.
yeah, there's all sorts of things. Yeah,
It's already been done.
Gary, cut out drilling.
Cricket bats? Any cricket bats?
yeah.
Cricket
So
buckles.
the history is just phenomenal that we have here. We've got probably the best run of alluvial diggings that was renowned for big nuggets in the entire state, if not in the country. The amount of nuggets that we've got, anything from 100 ounces. So far we've been able to catalogue somewhere in excess of 60 to 70 nuggets that were anything from 50 up to 1,200 ounces that came off this particular piece of land. So they can't get them all.
No, because you may find out you've got an old digger will dig there, another one there, and there'll be a big one right in between.
Correct. The good thing that we see with our position, particularly with German Gully, a lot of the gold being 8 and 10 feet high, even the large pieces, like they got those because they happen to sink on top of them. We're looking at potentially, because they couldn't take out 8 or 10 feet thick. So they get those, they try to take out a little bit more, but then they'd end up sinking straight to bottom, because if they took out 8 or 10 feet, that it's just, and there's another hole beside them, they're just making that ground so unstable that people would be dead. So that's right. Yeah. So we're looking that we've probably got 50% of the old lead that just has not been touched. And given the history of it, I think we might be in for some fantastic things. And if they're here filming at the time, people will get the opportunity to see those coming out. So we don't, what Mick and I don't do, which people always make reference to, we do not fake or manufacture anything that we find.
Well, what for? There's no need for it.
Well, whatever we find, we're happy to show when they're here. What we find when they're not here, doesn't
None of their business.
Now, have you been
That's a good thing.
You've been taking photos of each of the decent finds that you get?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And where you are and what ground you're in.
Yes, and we actually map it. Fully map it all out. Yeah. So we know exactly what's come out, where it's come out. Yeah.
The distribution.
So you're getting a pattern, aren't you?
Yeah.
And what about the reefs? You out trying to eventually try and find out the source, or?
Yes, we will be.
Yes, we're quite aware of that. The reef lines,
Any through here, or are they all further uphill?
4 reef lines running through this property.
Yeah. So and probably the one that's, because the ones coming up up onto the hills here, they were readily, there for the old prospect. They knew what they were looking for. So everything was open to the eye. They could pick the fault structures. They could pick the, what they called the indicators, cutting the country on the top of the ground. The exciting thing for us is there's a reef that runs parallel right alongside the main lead, and which we believe is why those bigger nuggets were up high in the system.
Right through.
So that reef structure that runs right alongside, they couldn't see it. It was covered by 20 feet of overburden. So it's been well documented that most of the resource for the gold that was found in that old lead over this length of property has not been discovered.
Oh, right.
So it was found in 2 locations along the lead, but we have about 14, I think we've got, of indicator, fault structures cutting east to west.
Okay.
And on everything out to the east and out to the west, every one of those structures has produced gold. So there's no reason why it wouldn't produce gold in those same zones along that main lead. So yeah, that's quite an exciting thing for us. The only way the old miners found those reefs when they were digging was they actually happened to sink down on top of them and gold was still hanging out of the reef.
Yeah, right.
So, and then Wright's reef, they hit that at 20 feet and continued to mine that down from that point down to 70 feet.
Ooh.
And they were getting 14 ounces to the tub, which was a bucket. So they were getting 14 ounces to the bucket, to the tub, down to 70 feet once they hit it. Yeah. So that's a substantial fault zone, so we'll be keeping our eyes open on that. But the one thing that's noted along there, every fault structure had a different characteristic with the gold. So when we hit along that structure, when we hit specimens that are carrying a different type matrix, we know to expand out and expose that reef and look for where the indicators made that gold. Yeah,
well, that's a bit of another bit of interest for the whole
yeah.
thing.
And a lot of people, they don't sort of really understand our structures here when we say indicators. They don't really they don't really understand what does the indicator mean and those sorts of things. They look at the reef, but when you're in an indicator zone in a belt, the gold within that reef will only make on that spot.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not disseminated right throughout the reef.
Yeah.
You've got a clay intrusion that cuts east-west. Then you've got a horizontal fault that creates like a floor level.
Yeah.
And so, over the space of 20, 30 metres, you might have 4 or 5 of those clay faults that are vertical, and they trap the solution, which then forms gold, but only on that point. You can go a foot either side of it, no gold. Your grades might go down to 0.2 of a gram to the metre. But on that fault, she's thick and heavy.
So you clean the floor when you get to the basement and map it.
You get down to there, the fault structure will continue, because what happens, your floors are also on a dip, generally heading south. So when everything was molten and everything was hot and cooling, those solutions would travel along those floor levels, and then they'd hit one of those faults. If that fault was cutting down in the earth, then that solution would hit that fault and go down, and then hit another level, and that's what creates your different levels in different reefs. So that gold would continue because it's still molten, it's a liquid, and that travels along the floor. If it hits upward pressure, which is another fault coming back up out of the ground, then that solution comes back up. So, and they're what we would call a productive fault, because that's bringing the solution close to the surface, and they're the ones you chase.
Have you found any shorings in the old mines at all?
Like we get props, obviously, and generally on this particular lead, everywhere we got props, we got gold, didn't we, Rick?
Mainly in the gutter.
Where there were no props, not much gold.
Okay.
You still got to sniff every now and then, but
They only put their props in if they're actually getting something.
If they're starting to belly out down the bottom.
So they sink their hole down, They sampled the bottom. They took out as little as what they needed to. If they got any sort of result, then they would bell the hole out and they'd put props in. Okay. If they didn't get a result, they'd move on and dig another hole. Yeah. But then some of the old miners used to go down some of those holes that weren't belled out. They'd bell them out and they'd get gold.
Yeah.
You know, so it was just things that happened. Historically, people came back to the old lead and went down some of the old shafts and chipped out some of the high wash because it was known for the gold being in that high wash, and they were still getting any pieces up to 30 to 50 ounce. You know, that had been left by the old miners previously.
So there's no indication of a false bottom here at all? Like parts of Ballarat had false bottom.
Yeah, not here on this particular block, and nothing historically noted either. Yeah, so it's just generally straight onto a true bottom here.